This course has one objective: to help you become a top 1% presenter. My name is Oliver Aus. Over the last 20 years, I've worked with hundreds of CEOs and founders on some of the biggest turning points, from PR crises to being on the biggest stages in the world like TED and South by Southwest. And with this course, I want to ensure that you can also become an elite top 1% presenter. And to make it super easy to follow along, I created the Perfect Presentation Planner. It's my CEO system for presentations. Grab it now. The link is in the description below. Enjoy.
You're already a good presenter. How do you become a great one? My goal with this course is to help you join the top 1% of presenters. Specifically, we want to ensure that you halve the time you spend on preparing presentation by doubling its impact. So why do presentations matter? First of all, they're the number one opportunity for you to showcase your expertise. Secondly, we spend a lot of time presenting and listening to presentations. It could be 1.5 days in some organizations. And thirdly, most importantly, presentations are the number one way how you get people to move, to change, to pursue an objective. So for you as a leader to be a strong communicator is absolutely central. It is central to your mission, it is central to your business's mission, and it is also fun and exciting. If you see that people respond to what you have to say, that is reward in itself. Let me introduce myself briefly. My name is Oliver Aus, and for many years I've been working with hundreds and hundreds of leaders and CEOs, private sector, public sector, many industries, many countries, helping them to become top communicators. I've written several books about leadership communication, and I host a popular podcast called Speak Like a CEO. And I'm here today not to perform for yourself. I'm not reading from a script or teleprompter. I simply want to help you become a top 1% presenter. So you probably wonder, how do I become a top 1% presenter? Well, first of all, the great presenters, they're not going for perfection. They're aiming for connection. They show up as themselves. They're authentic and they know how to connect with the audience. Secondly, they know how to move people to action. They're not just informing, they're inspiring. And thirdly, they know how to use presentations for their own advantage, to get approval for a project maybe, to get funding for their startup, or to enhance their standing within an organization. The good news is that everyone can be a great presenter. It is a learnable skill. It doesn't matter whether you have an innate talent, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, whether you're a native speaker or like me, you're not a native speaker. Because the best presenters, they show up as him or herself. And to be able to do that, we need a framework, the 3 Ps. Great leaders and communicators use a lot of mental models and frameworks. It helps them to deal with the complexities and time pressures of the day-to-day business life. The most effective for presenting is the 3P framework. It works with any topic, and it stands for plan, practice, present. Specifically, plan what you want to say, practice how you say it, and present it with confidence. This is also how this course is structured, of course, the 3 Ps. We're going to look at how you structure your presentation, how to create an outline in a few minutes, and how you fill it with life. We're also going to look at the mistakes people make to avoid them and what to do instead. And we're going to look at why people are nervous when they present, how to stay calm and build confidence over time. But I need to be honest with you, this video course alone will not mean you join the ranks of the top 1% presenters. Yes, it's an important part of it, but you also need to do and you need to seek feedback from others. And the good news is you can do this every time from now on that you have a presentation. Use the videos, use the planner. And remember, what we want to achieve here is that you halve your preparation time and double your impact. That's what we're aiming for. With the 3P framework, you're absolutely in a position to achieve that. So the first action, please take the topic of your next presentation and put it into the presentation planner. But before we dive into the 3P framework, let's look at the 7 key mistakes people make all the time when they present and how to avoid them. So here are the 7 deadly sins of presenting, aka the most common mistakes we all make, but it's important to be aware of them so we can avoid them. Number 1 is slide thinking, and that's the idea that a 20-minute presentation equals 20 slides. I know it's been done a lot, but the result is always the same, a predictable, mediocre presentation. Number 2, wasting the audience's time. TED Talks are short for a reason. Short is usually better when you present. Number 3, too complicated. Complicated is easy, but it is selfish because in a way we expect the audience to do the hard work for us, which of course they don't, because our brains are wired to conserve energy. So in presentation that's too complicated will simply fall on deaf ears. Number 4, the data dump, very prominent of course. Our short-term memories can only hold up to 7 pieces of information at any one time. So if I include lots of facts and information in my presentation, the audience will simply not be able to memorize them and they will check out mentally. Number 5, the great disconnect. Now that one is very interesting. Presenters tend to think in facts and logic. The audience, however, is still in an instinctive phase and they need to be taken on a journey from the instinctive to the emotional and only then to the logical. And that, if we don't adhere to that, creates the disconnect between the logical and the emotional. And of course, that's the opposite of what we want to achieve. We want to achieve connection, not disconnection. So be aware, you need to take the audience on a journey from instinctive to emotional to logical. We will obviously talk about how that can be done. Number 6, no suitable structure. If you don't have the right structure, it will take you a long time to prepare for your presentation. It has no flow to it, and you probably find it hard to memorize it. The audience, on the other hand, also finds it hard to follow and memorize what you've said. So not using a structure is one of the biggest and most common mistakes I see. Number 7, not starting with the audience or even blaming the audience if they don't pay attention. You have to assume apathy. The audience doesn't care. It's our job to make them care. And the only way you get the audience to care is if you make your presentation about them. Now, I've been guilty of all these mistakes, in particular probably number 6, the lack of structure. For years, I presented without really understanding how to structure a presentation properly, which is why I pay so much attention to it now. Now, what these mistakes have in common is that if you make them, you will fail to connect with the audience. It's as simple as that. And remember, the key objective of a top presenter is to connect with the audience. So in the following, we will learn how to avoid these mistakes, but also what to do instead. It's time now to tackle the first P, to plan what you want to say. And remember, our return on investment here is to half the time you spend preparing for your next presentation, any presentation till the end of your career. And to do that, you have the resources in the academy at hand, and of course your presentation planner accompanying this video course. What we will learn now is how to structure a presentation, how to create an outline in minutes, how to fill it with life, with messages, with hooks, and to make the audience care. I mean, that's at the heart of it, right? To make the audience care. So how do you make the audience care? This requires a big shift in thinking. The mediocre presenters, well, what do? They go back to their last PowerPoint presentation and start there. Top presenters, they think about the audience and start there. And this is what we are going to do, because they know that they have to pass the 90% test. It means that you need to bring 90% of the audience on your side in 5 minutes. If you pass the test, you're off to flying start, and you probably reach all your objectives for the presentation. And of course, the only way to pass the 90% test is to make it about the audience. But at the same time, of course, you have your own objectives. So how do we bring these two together? It's actually quite simple. You start with the end in mind and work backwards. And for that, I recommend 3 questions. First of all, why do you hold this presentation? You need to be very clear why you're in this situation, what you want to achieve. Secondly, what do you want the audience to know, feel, and do? And thirdly, what's in it for them? So let's say I work in a large company and I've been asked to present to the board about my project. My objective is to make sure the board knows about the progress we're making, and secondly, to give me the green light for the next stage of the project. I want the board to know that we're making good progress. I want them to feel excited about the next phase, and I want them to give me the green light. And thirdly, what's in it for them? Well, there's the emotional benefit of peace of mind. They know it's in good hands, it's going in the right direction. Maybe they're even excited. And there's the cold, hard business benefit. We're probably making some more money as a business because of the success of my project. So you can see how these come together, my objectives and the audience's objectives. Think about it as a Venn diagram, and where we're presenting is in the overlapping part. So I want you to take action now. Take your presentation planner and write down the answers to the 3 questions I just gave you. What is the objective? What do you want the audience to know, feel, and do? And what's in it for them? Please do it now, because your answers will guide everything you do from here on. Structure is so key. A lot of people in business spend days, even weeks, preparing for a presentation, focusing on the slides, and still get mediocre results. And the reason is usually that they don't use the right structure or no structure at all. Structure is really win-win. For me as a presenter, it cuts down the time I need to prepare for the presentation. It makes it very easy to memorize my presentation. And for the audience, it makes it very easy to follow the presenter, and at the same time, it increases trust and memorization. So it's a win-win situation. When I talk about structure, I'm not talking about a long 10-point bullet point list that you sometimes see. That is a list, that is not a structure. I'm talking about a tried and tested narrative arc that captivates the audience. What? So what? Now what? A simple 3-step structure you can use for any presentation or any meeting. Problem, solution, benefit. Again, 3 simple steps. It works particularly well when you want to persuade people of a solution you have to a problem. Or how about the STAR structure? Situation, task, action, results is what you can use when you want to move people to action. Now, the task for you is now to look at the resources, the available options, and pick a structure for your next presentation. This is key. It's key that you do this because you already know what you want to achieve, what the audience gets out of your presentation. Now you can pick a structure that matches your objectives and the value you bring to the audience. But remember, our objective here is to join the top 1% of presenters, and this is a crucial step to pick the right structure. So please pick a structure, but don't open PowerPoint. We will get to slides later, but it is too early. We need to get our structure and our content, our messages right first. So put your structure in the presentation planner, and then we will take the next step, which is to ensure that your message is simple and clear. People will forget 90% of what you tell them in a presentation. I know it's crazy, but a lot of studies have shown that. So how do we deal with that? Should we increase that to 20% or maybe 30%? Turns out, no, that's not the right way forward. In fact, what you want to do is control the 10% and make sure that the 90% are in service and support of the 10%. Remember, one of the most common mistakes is that presenters use too many messages and they're too complicated. And that offloads the burden to the audience, and of course they reject it. 4 out of 5 executives stopped listening to the presentation in the last meeting, according to one survey. So what we're after is simple, effective messages that work and move people to action. Remember, one of our objectives is that we're not just halving the time you spend preparing, we also want to double the impact. And for that, we need effective messages. So here are 5 principles that you can apply as a test to any message and see if it is effective. Number 1, beneficial. It needs to benefit the audience. What's in it for them? Number 2, your message needs to be focused. It can't be all things to all people. Number 3, it needs to be salient, which means it stands out. It's not like all the other messages we've heard that day. Number 4, the message needs to be empathetic, which means I need to think about the audience. I keep it short, I keep it clear, I avoid jargon, and I use conversational language as if I were talking to a friend. Number 5, minimal. Simple messages contain everything they need, but only what they need. So cut the fluff. Now here's the action for you. Use those principles to craft the key message for your presentation. And then, what are the backup messages? So for instance, if you've chosen a structure that is problem, solution, benefit, you have 3 messages, one referring to problem, one to solution, one to benefit. So this already gives you the outline. The key message is your headline. That's the thing you always come back to. And it is backed up by, let's say, 3 other messages, problem, solution, benefit in this case, and that will give you the basis for your outline. Once you have that, you can, for instance, add 3 bullet points to each of the 3 parts of your presentation. So please do the following 3 things. First of all, write down your key message. Secondly, write down the messages that support the key message. For instance, if your structure is problem, solution, benefit, you will have 1 message for problem, 1 for solution, 1 for benefit, in addition and supporting your key message. And number 3, you may want to add a few bullet points underneath each of these headlines. So under problem, you may have 3 bullet points explaining the problem in more detail, and so forth. And if you do that, what you have is an outline, and it only took you a few minutes. This outline, I call it a plan on a page, because I keep it to a page, and this page is really something I can already use and hold a presentation with some practice. But of course, we want to take it to the next stage and make sure you enter the 1% of presenters. Now that you have a clear structure, key message, and a plan on a page, we want to make sure that you capture the audience from the get-go. Nothing matters more than the first and the last sentence of your presentation. That's due to the primacy and the recency biases. They simply mean that we are most likely to remember what we heard first and what we heard last. And the beginning is, of course, the most important part. Why? Because remember the 90% test. We want to get 90% of the audience on our side in just 5 minutes. In reality, though, we only have a few seconds to wow the audience before they start thinking about lunch or looking at their phones. That's why I always recommend to skip the niceties like, thank you for inviting me, I'm glad to be here, wonderful day, blah, blah, blah. I would just cut this out and get straight to your hook. I would also recommend you don't introduce yourself if you can avoid it, because people already know you, or you can just put your name and title on the title slide. Or if you have to introduce yourself, do it after the hook, but always start with a hook. Or if you have to introduce yourself, do it after the introduction, as I did in the first video. So I always recommend to use a killer opening line to start off with. To give you a few examples, the riddle. Why do 90% of startups fail? You can also phrase this as a startling statistic. 90% of startups fail. Or as a personal anecdote, I recently met a founder, his second business in 3 years failed. And he pointed me to the fact that 90% of startups fail. What we're not saying is, the problem we are tackling today is that 90% of startups fail. That is boring. So use a killer opening line. Now let's look at the endings. I would also recommend here not to say something like, thank you for your time. Also, don't put that on a slide, by the way. It's very weak. We want to end with a bang, because that is prime real estate. This is what people actually remember. An easy way to approach it is to start with a question, and then at the end, answer the question and include a call to action. So for instance, if I ask at the beginning, why do 90% of startups fail? I can say at the end, we've now established that 90% of startups fail, at least in part, because of poor leadership communication skills. So let's all make sure that we improve our communication skills. So that will be a good start and a good ending, and you can imagine the middle part here. So 2 actions for you. Write down the first line of your presentation. And second action, write down the last line of your presentation so you make sure you end strong. Now, once you have that, you have a structure, you have an outline, you have a key message, you have backup messages, and now you have a great introduction and a wonderful ending. And these are the main pillars when you plan for a presentation with impact. Why storytelling? Presenters tend to rely on facts and logic. The audience, however, needs to be taken on a journey from the instinctive to the emotional to the factual. And stories are a great vehicle to achieve that. Often you find that the presenter wants to talk about their ongoing project, but the audience thinks about, well, can I trust this person? Why am I here? What's in it for me? And this creates the disconnect we talked about before. And remember, we want to create connection and avoid disconnection. So how to do that? The instinctive part is in particular the first impression you make. Your appearance, the way you enter the room, the confidence you exude. The emotional part, well, that's the storytelling. And you can use stories in various ways in a presentation. For instance, you can start with a story. In the previous video, I talked about the anecdote at the beginning, so we can just use a story and kick off and get people's attention and emotional buy-in that way. You can also tell a story as part of the presentation. And I would recommend to do this relatively early because, remember, we want to take people on the journey. And that can be a customer story, for instance, or a success story of your team. And thirdly, you can structure your whole presentation like a story. How do you do that? Well, there are a couple of frameworks which I share in the materials that you can use for that. For instance, my story, our story, the future. You can already see how 3 stories are baked into one overarching storyline. Or you use the Hollywood 3-act structure. Excite, disturb, assure. Very commonly used in entertainment, but it can also work well in business. There are several mistakes you can make in storytelling. It's good to be aware of them. One common mistake is to use the hero's journey, but make yourself or your business or your product the hero. If you use the hero's journey, it's always the audience who's the hero. You're the guide. Another mistake I see is use classical storytelling when it's not appropriate. Classical storytelling is usually morality tale. It's about a protagonist and the rights and wrongs and what happens to that person, how that person changes. Now, that can work in business, but often it's not the right approach, because a morality tale also means that there's a villain and there's a victim. And who wants to be the victim and the villain? Well, certainly not your audience. So use classical storytelling with caution. It is better to think about narratives when you're in business. Think about the narrative as an overarching story without hero and without right or wrong. You're just telling the story. And you find more details on that, of course, in the materials, so you know exactly how to structure that. Now, I would like you to take 2 actions now. Do some reflective journaling and write down some stories that you can use for one of your future presentations. Become a story collector if you like. We've come across so many stories, we often forget them, and then we don't have them at the ready when we need them. So I collect stories, and I would recommend you maybe want to start the same. And secondly, and specifically about this presentation, craft a little story and include it in your presentation. Think where it makes sense to include it, ideally somewhere at the beginning, maybe customer story, maybe something that's happened to you, personal anecdote or something like that, and include it. And just get into the habit of at least using one story in every speech, talk, or presentation you do. So some reflective journaling and one story to be included in your presentation. We reach the final part of the first P, plan what you want to say. And this is about slides or any other asset you may want to use for your presentation. Think about top presenters and top communicators in business, in your business, maybe people you watched videos of. They probably have one thing in common, which is they speak relatively freely. They can present relatively freely. Okay, maybe they use slides, but they don't need the slides. They're not using the slides as crutches. They're not reading from the slides. Their slides are actually for the audience. They're not for the presenter. And that is the crucial difference. And that is what you are going to do. And you can do that now because you're using a structure and you're using key messages and all the other things we've talked about already. And that makes it very easy for you to memorize at least the broad outlines of your presentation. Now, I know it's very common in businesses to have slides and just read the bullet points or at least use them as crutches. So why is that? I think first of all, it's just a habit. A lot of organizations just accept that that's the way things are done, so everyone is doing it. It doesn't mean it's right or it's good. Secondly, people are obviously nervous, so they stick to the slides because they're worried that their brain freezes and they don't know how to proceed. So it feels to them more risky to get rid of the slides or to change the slides. And thirdly, because for some presenters, the goals, the structure, the messages isn't clear enough. So all they've done is write a lot of bullet points on slides, and that lack of clarity obviously shows in the delivery, which will be mediocre at best. So I'm asking you, do you need slides for your next presentation? Yes? Great. We're going to talk about that. But maybe you want to ditch the deck, and that's great too. And you can look at the resources and find some cool alternatives. The good news is we're already free because we have a structure and outline. We have key messages and cool start to our presentation. But if you use slides, this is how I would think about them. On the title slide, put your key message. Don't put a topic anywhere. Always put a message. And on the title slide, it's your key message. For the rest of the presentation of the slide deck, what you want to do is you structure it in the same way as your outline. So if you have problem, solution, benefit, then this is the structure of the slide deck as well. And that makes it so intuitive. And if you have 3 bullet points underneath these 3 sections, then each of these becomes a slide. So you have a title slide. You may have 3 slides on the problem where you dive deeper into what the problem is, 3 slides on your solution, and 3 slides on the benefit. And that gives you a 10-slide presentation that is very intuitive, very easy to remember, and certainly not too long. Make it very visual. Don't use too many words. If you put bullet points or lots of words on it, make sure the font is 20 to 30. It needs to be really big for people to see it, and also as a positive constraint, so you're not using it to put lots of bullet points on it. Bullets kill. So lots of visuals on the slide, very few words, and if you use words, use big fonts. Now, the headline of each slide is very important because that is the message. the point you want to get across on that slide. And that's a great test because sometimes we struggle identifying the key point of a slide. What is the message I want to send here? And if that is the case, you may not need the slide. In fact, the way I think about it is when I look at a slide deck I've produced, I think, what if someone gave me $1,000 for every slide I would cut? Which one would I actually really keep and need? So that's a neat little trick you can use to identify slides you may want to get rid of. So keep it short, keep it very visual, and really think before you create a slide deck whether you need them. Again, the key mistake I see is slide thinking. 20 minutes equals 20 slides. I go back to the old slide deck I had, and the result is predictable, mediocre, and very hard to present and even impossible to remember. So we don't want that. We want slides that support the message, are visual, and they actually create a multi-sensory experience for the audience. They hear us talk, they also see the visuals and maybe some words on the slides, and that makes it more likely that they remember, not less likely that they remember our key message. Remember, we want to control the 10%, and we do that by focusing on the key messages also on the slides. Sometimes you see presentations where the 10%, the key message is actually hidden in plain sight, and it's very difficult for the audience to discern what is actually really of importance here, so the result will be pretty random. Which 10% do they remember? Well, that presenter doesn't really have control over that, but you now, with what you know now, you have control. And the 10% you want to control, this is also what the slide should be focused on. So, 3 actions, please. First of all, decide if you want to use slides at all, or maybe something else. Secondly, fill your slides with life. You have a structure, you have an outline, and that enables you to relatively quickly fill your presentation with life, in particular because you're not putting a lot of words on it, but mostly visuals. And number 3, seek feedback from a friend, a colleague, our community, because someone else will tell you very quickly if the slides you've produced are effective. We started with the audience and we want to end with the audience. Presenting is not a one-way street. Anyone presenting knows that there may be objections, interruptions, and certainly questions. And we don't just want to deal with them competently, we want to do it with grace. So let's start with questions. Now, it makes sense to ask for questions at the end to not lose the flow of your presentation. And if the presentation is long, you may invite questions at the end of each section. You may still get interruptions and someone may say, oh, I have a question right now. And you can say, well, just to conclude my thought, I will come to your question in a moment. Interruptions can be rude or they can be born out of excitement. If it is a rude interruption, you can just hold up your hand, you can talk louder, or you can just say, just to finish my thought. You can also say, that's an interesting idea. Let me get back to that at the end of my presentation. In addition to questions and interruptions, you may also get objections from the audience. And how do you deal with objections from a skeptical audience? The key is to anticipate these objections. Usually you know what people will push back on, so you can prepare for that. You also want to think about emotional objections versus logical objections because these two require different responses. And of course, you always want to connect with the audience because if you connect, then harsh feedback is much less likely. And crucially, don't be defensive. Welcome any feedback. It's a chance to persuade a critical audience. So if someone says, well, that would never work here, welcome it. Acknowledge their concern. You're right. That wouldn't work everywhere, but could you see an instance where this could work here? You can also push back a little. Well, have you tried? And you can use reframing. So if someone asks you a question about pricing, you may want to talk in your answer about value instead. There's also paraphrasing, which is a nice tool because if someone asks you a critical question, you can rephrase it in your own words to say, do I understand you correctly that? Because that way you show you have empathy with the person asking the question as well as the audience, because you're going through the trouble of trying to understand where they're coming from. You're making an effort to understand them, and an audience usually values that in a presenter. So, over to you. Please write down the most likely questions and objections you may get when you present. Write it down and also think, of course, about the answers, because the only difficult questions and objections we get are the ones we haven't prepared for. Now, let's turn knowledge into action. Plan what you say, practice how you say it, and present it with confidence. That's the 3P framework. We're now focusing on part 2, practice how you say it, the delivery part. And remember, our objective here is to double the impact your presentation have. You may wonder, what does that mean and how do I know? Well, let me give you an example. Let's say you're presenting to your team, representing the week's priorities. A strong, clear, memorable presentation will ensure that the whole team is aligned and moves in the same direction at speed, thereby increasing the impact you had on them and they have on the business. At the same time, there will be fewer follow-up messages and meetings because you've already created that clarity from the get-go. So you spend less time and you're increasing the impact. The key point is that you want to be authentically you. There's no better way to connect with people than to be genuine. But you want to be the best version of yourself, and more importantly, you want to be the best version of yourself in service of the audience. Many smart people make this classic mistake. They spend too much time thinking about what they will say and too little time thinking about how they say it. That means on the day they're under-prepared and they under-deliver. Now, we know how to fix this. We know how to save a lot of time at the planning stage, and let's reinvest some of that time to wow the audience. Both what you say and how you say it are equally important. But if those two are not aligned, people will not believe your words. They will believe your body. They believe their body will tell them the truth. That's just how we are wired. So if I say, well, I'm confident that we're going to meet the quarterly targets, people will not think I'm confident. They will feel that I'm not confident, even though I say I'm confident. So that is why body language is so important. People believe your body more than your words. So when you present, your subconscious cues, your body language, your facial expressions, your hands, your body language, all of that will either support your message or will distract from your message. So we want to make sure all of that is aligned. I know it's uncomfortable. I know very few people do it. And that's why it is such a big opportunity for you. If 99% of people don't do it and you want to be among the 1%, then watching yourself on video is actually a highly effective strategy. If I do a weird thing with my hand, for instance, I want to know. I want to find out. I don't want to do that until the end of my career. And I'm sure you are the same. So the easy way is to record yourself and then work on one thing at a time. And we're going to start with the body language because that has the biggest effect on your overall message. Body language has three parts: your posture, your hands, and your face. Let's start with your posture because that's actually pretty obvious. You want to stand tall, straight back, pull your shoulders back. And you don't want to slump, because if you slump, you're probably not going to look very confident. So, very easy. The other aspect about the posture you want to keep in mind is that you want to be open and not closed. You've heard this before, I'm sure. You don't want to close your arms or cross your legs because you will look at best defensive. So, open body language, stand tall. Secondly, hands. This is one of the most common questions I get. What should I do with my hands? It's actually relatively simple because your hands help you tell your story. So if profits go up, you do this. If profits go down, you do that. If you want everyone to work together, you can do this. 3 points I want to make. We really need to get this done. Let's dive deeper into this particular point. You see what I'm doing? I'm simply using my hands, knowing some hand gestures that work, and emphasize the points I'm making. Should I put my hand in my pocket? Well, you can do that, but you should do this intentionally. For instance, if there's a Q&A and you want to appear really self-assured and show how relaxed you are about the questions you're getting, but you shouldn't put your hand in your pocket while you present because you look kind of like you don't really care. So use your hands to tell your story. Number 3, your face. Again, you want to ensure that your facial expressions are aligned with your message. We've all seen speakers who deliver bad news with an awkward grin, or they deliver good news but forget to smile. So we're looking for congruence between the body, the face, and the message. And remember, we always want to make sure that our body language and our message is aligned. Now, what I explained to you is actually the 20% that gets you 80% of the results. And as always, you can dive in deeper in the Academy resources. That's really the 80-20. 20% of what you need to know about body language that gives you at least 80% of the result. I want to ask now, please record yourself for 3 minutes while you present. And then watch it without the sound so you can pay full attention to your body language. Then you probably notice a few things, but just focus on one thing. one thing only, and try to improve that. Record yourself again, watch it again, no sound, and then move on to the next thing. Only ever try to improve one thing at a time. If you try to improve several things at a time, you're probably overwhelmed, you don't know what to pay attention to, and the result will probably be worse than before. So record yourself without sound, improve one thing at a time. Just be careful that you don't fidget or play with a pen or the ring on your finger, because that will always look like you're lacking confidence. Now, let's move on to the other key factor when we talk about practicing how to present: your voice. Your voice is a powerful instrument. A powerful voice is actually key to developing a powerful presence. And the good news here is that you can train your voice, you can develop it, just like I do it as a podcaster, like speakers do it, like professional musicians do it, for instance. And it's actually good fun. And remember, we're not aiming for perfection, we're aiming for connection. And that means what we're trying to do is move away from a monotonous monologue and move to vocal variety. So it's just more interesting and enticing to listen to you. I recommend you look at the 5 Ps. The first one is pace. That is how fast or how slow you speak. And obviously you can slow down if you want to emphasize certain points. Secondly, pitch. You can speak in a low voice or you can speak in a high voice to indicate you're very excited about something. That's your pitch. Number 3, potency. That's how loud you speak, the volume. You can speak really loud in a presentation, or you speak quietly because you want people to really pay attention and lean in. The 4th P, pause. Pauses are so important. What I would recommend is that before you deliver a key message, just pause for a second or two. And the 5th P is prosody. That's kind of like the melody, how you speak. It's going up and down, and that melody makes it memorable, but it's also used to convey emotions. So the 5 Ps you want to think about when you listen to your voice: pace, pitch, potency, pause, and prosody. And here's another aspect. You probably noticed this, but when people use a lot of filler sounds and filler words, it's actually quite annoying and they don't really sound confident. What do I mean by that? Well, famous filler words are things like, you know. Famous filler sounds are and ah. So it's actually quite easy to get rid of them once you put your mind to it. For instance, when I started podcasting 6 years ago and listened to my recordings, I was shocked how often I said, you know. And of course, I just used it to fill the air. I didn't like the sound of silence, and I bought myself time to think. And that's really it. We are using these not because they create meaning or connection. We're using these to give us time to think. So how do we get rid of them? First of all, listen to your recording and find out if you use any filler sounds or filler words. Secondly, give yourself an emotional license to pause, because only if you do that will you actually sit in silence and comfort and rather think than fill the air and the void with filler sounds, and rather to accept that there may be silence for a second or two, which is actually way more powerful. It comes across as way more senior, way more in charge, way more confident. See what I just did there? Just take a beat. It's perfectly fine. The void doesn't need to be filled with filler sounds. So you're aware of them, you know what to do about them, now you do need to practice them. Because filler sounds are essentially a habit, right? And like any habit, it takes a little bit of time to break them. But you're already taking the first steps. So record yourself again, pay attention to the 5 Ps, and pay attention to any filler words. And again, if you want to change something, improve something, focus on one thing and then do it all over again. Now, we talked about your body language. So your body language is confident, your voice is confident. We can now look at bringing it all together for you to become a confident presenter and maybe even a charismatic speaker. You planned what you want to say, you practice how you're going to say it. Now it's time to cover the 3rd P, presenting with confidence. It is totally normal to feel nervous before you present, before you speak in front of others. It's just so human nature. It is an unnatural situation which we're thrown into. So just accept it's unnatural and that you may feel nervous. Welcome it. So how do we stay calm and confident in such a situation? For that, I've developed the BMW method. It stands for body, mind, and words. And the body, of course, always comes first because nervousness is first and foremost a bodily reaction. Now, concerning your body, you want to recenter your nervous system if you feel nervous. And you do that through breathing, first and foremost. Now, nervous speakers, they breathe shallowly from the upper chest. You want to breathe deeply from your stomach, from your diaphragm. So you can look up some breathing techniques, but the key is to exhale more than you inhale. Why? Because CO2 accumulates in your body and you need to get it out for the oxygen to come into your body, because the oxygen is where the energy is coming from. So if you're short of breath, it's probably because there's too much CO2 in your body. So breathe out more than you breathe in. For instance, you can try the 4-6 breathing method, where you breathe into the count of 4 and breathe out to the count of 6. So in addition to breathing, I would try motion. Motion can help a great deal in getting rid of nervousness and any butterflies you may feel. So for instance, you clap your hands, you can throw your arms around, you can walk around the block, you can jump up and down. Try what's working for you. In fact, there are quite a few techniques you can use to calm your nerves, and you find them in the resources, but not everything is working for everyone. So you really want to try a few, but I would start with these two if you're not sure: breathing and bodily motion. The M in B&W stands for the mind. And here you can do some interesting reframing. Instead of thinking about it as nervousness, think about it as excitement. I'm excited to be here. Clearly, I'm supposed to be here because I've been invited to hold this presentation. I'm the expert on the subject. Welcome your nervousness. You're in an unnatural situation, so don't expect your system to behave naturally. It's unusual. Accept it. And then you can go one step further, is to reframe the experience. Actually, I'm not experiencing nervousness, I'm excited because this is a great opportunity. I love holding presentations. And clearly I'm the expert because I have been invited to hold this presentation. And if you want to go further, try to get out of your own head. That's where a lot of nervousness comes from, that we are thinking too much about things that should happen or could go wrong and we want to say. Rather, go in there with an intention to give and not to get. And if you make it about the audience, if you focus on your message and not yourself, that actually helps a great deal to get out of your head and focus at the task at hand. And finally, on the mind, I would say, enjoy the experience. I often tell myself, well, this is the fun part. Let me enjoy this. This is great. I worked hard to be here, so I will enjoy this experience, even if it may be uncomfortable. And then the W, your words, you already covered those. And if you're not confident in those, go back to part 1 and 2. Make sure you're confident in your words and how you present them. And that's really it. And don't forget to inject energy. And this is, for me, an overarching big subject on its own. You want to bring in the energy. You want to excite people. If you don't feel it, if you're not passionate about your subject, how can you expect the audience to be passionate? And passion is a function of energy. And don't forget one thing. Presentation needs more energy than a one-on-one conversation. It's an energy filter, if you like. So you need to inject a lot of energy, and it needs to feel over the top for you to feel right for the audience. So here's the action for you. Record yourself again for 3 minutes. Pay attention to your body, your mind, your words, and the energy you bring. Do you bring the right level of energy to fill a big room with energy? And if not, find your energy switch and take it up a notch. Now, you're fully prepared. Except one thing, the audience, they will have questions and objections. So we have to think about those as well. Presenting is not a one-way street, so let's look again at the end of this course at our audience. We started by asking, how can you join the top 1% of presenters? The best presenters seem natural, authentic, they do connect with the audience, and the truth is, they're doing that by applying the methods and frameworks in this course. We started by asking how you can join the top 1% of presenters. The best presenters, they seem natural, authentic, they connect with the audience. And they do that by applying the principles and the framework we talked about in this course. And the good news is, you can do that too now. You have all the knowledge, and we walked through a complete presentation that you've planned and prepared, and you're ready to present with confidence. And you will be so much faster while having a bigger impact. If pressed, you could now prepare a presentation just 15 minutes, maybe 1 minute to pick a structure, maybe 6 minutes to create the one-page outline, and then the rest of the time just to fill it with live and examples and more details. So in 50 minutes, you could actually create quite a decent presentation. And because you have a plan on a page, an outline, you can actually just go and hold that. And for me, that is so much better, more effective than staring at a PowerPoint presentation for hours and hours. So please do the following. For the next presentation, use the 3P framework. Plan what you will say, practice how you say it, and then present it with confidence. You can use these videos, you can watch them anytime you want, and you can also use the presentation planner, which is probably a nice shortcut, plus all the other resources in the Academy. But don't give in to the temptation to go back to an old PowerPoint presentation work from that. I hope we are beyond that. We don't want to be mediocre presenter anymore. We want to join the top 1% of presenters. And I know you can do it, I know you will do it, because you're here and you watch the whole course and you have all the materials and all the input you need to make it happen. And then after your next presentation, I would invite you to some reflective journaling. Just think about what went well and what maybe didn't go optimally. And you can work on that and always work on one thing at a time so it doesn't become overwhelming, but a process of continuous improvement. Let's kill boring presentations. Let's have your audience lean in. Let's turn adrenaline into authority.